welcome to our live event. My name is Brenda KB Anderson, and today I'm going to be sharing with you two of my favorite designs that I have worked up. It is the Woodlands Beanie and the Woodlands Mitts. So we're going to be talking a little bit about these two pieces, my inspiration behind them, and then I'm going to delve a little bit into the stitching and also ideas on different ways to customize this and how to kind of analyze how the stitches fit together. So if you want to design something for yourself, you'll have a jumping off point here. And then after I wrap that up here, we are going to be streaming the two live tutorials, one full tutorial on how to make the mitts and a full tutorial on how to make the beanie. So it's going to be like a big woodland fest today. All right, well, I'm very excited that you guys are here. I'm so glad you guys have joined me. Go ahead and pop in and say hi if you like. Also, definitely if you have any questions about these projects or questions about other things about crochet that you want to throw in the comments, let me know, and I'll be answering those during this live event. Let's get started talking about these two projects a little bit. Oh, first I just want to say hello to Mary. She's already, there's two Marys. Mary from New Hampshire and a Mary from Montana. Well, hello Marys, I'm glad you guys are here. Thank you for saying hello. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these two projects. So a long time ago, close to when I first started working for the Creative Crochet Corner website, I designed these mitts, and it was kind of early fall, and I was just thinking about something that I'd like to wear on a hike in the woods. And I was thinking, I know I wanted a bunch of texture, because for some reason to me, fall just feels like it should have a very rustic, textury fabric to it. And I was thinking about trees, tree bark, and then I came across this stitch pattern in one of my stitch pattern books, and I just thought it was so beautiful. I worked it up. I think I changed it just a little bit because it was like a wider repeat. And I loved it. I love that it was really stretchy. And then I discovered that I could add the ribbing into, on the edges of the stitch pattern and work it kind of all in one piece. And that made me very excited about this construction method. So these mitts are worked back and forth and turn rows in this direction. So when you're crocheting back and forth, it'll look like this. And then you kind of wrap it into a tube. At some point, you skip some stitches for that thumb, which look really nice because look at, they kind of fall in between, one of those little areas. It just looks like a repeat of this, but within a little space there for your thumb. And then you just wrap it into a tube and then you seam it closed. So this is what they look like when they're on. They're nice and stretchy. These are actually a size larger than I would normally wear. I have very small hands, but it still fits me because it's pretty stretchy. But yeah, they're just a really great stitch pattern. And the cool thing about the stitch pattern is it looks kind of like cables. It looks very complicated, but as you will see, it is far from complicated. It is a very easy stitch pattern to do. And it really looks like cables. It looks like something much more complicated going on here. So after that happened, realized after this was published, we realized how much people liked these, and I started getting messages like, hey, can you design something to go with that? Can you design a scarf? Can you design a hat? Can you I had suggestions coming in, and then I think maybe last year I ended up designing a hat to go along with the mitts, and this is what the hat looks like. So it has a double folded up brim, so there's a lot more of the ribbing that's worked here. So again, this is worked sideways in this direction, and we transition from one stitch pattern, transition into the next stitch pattern, towards the top of the beanie. And then there's a little space open at the top, and we close that all up later. Okay, so this is worked in a very similar method to how we are working these mitts, back and forth in those turned rows. And this gets to be folded up, and it's extra cozy. It's so nice and cozy. Both of these projects were worked up with, in this version, they were worked up in an alpaca, I think it's alpaca wool yarn. Let me just double check here. Let's see, yes, alpaca and wool, but you can definitely, and then I did have another version of the mitts that were made just in a wool, no alpaca. It doesn't have to have alpaca in it. I really like alpaca because it's soft and it's extra warm. And I live where it's very cold out, so I always love to throw alpaca into my projects when I can. But you can certainly substitute with something else. It could be all wool, it could be acrylic, it could be a blend of any of those things. It just works best if it's some kind of yarn that has a little bit of bounce to it, a little bit of give to it. So I would say not suggest a cotton yarn. I mean, there are cotton yarns that would probably work, but not like, you want to make sure that has a little bit of elasticity and a little bit of a memory if you're going to be swapping out with another yarn. So both of these were made with a lighter worsted weight or a DK, actually a DK or sport weight. So I had a yarn that was called a sport weight, but it was actually thicker than this yarn, which was called a light worsted or a DK. So really it's like a number 3, a CYCA number 3 yarn. You should do fine with, something in that category. And yeah, you don't need any special materials, just the yarn really, and some stitch markers will help you out, and the hook. And we'll get into those things later for these projects specifically once we get into those tutorials. I just kind of wanted to give you like the overview of what these were made out of, just so you can be thinking about that. All right, so when I started getting suggestions for making these other projects that would go along with it, I was thinking, I think this might be a nice time to just kind of share with you how the stitch pattern works, so that way if you kind of understand how the stitches fit together, you could design your own thing. So this stitch pattern would be fabulous for a blanket. Even the back of the stitch pattern looks cool. This is the back and this is the front. Okay, they're both textured and they both look really different from each other, but they both look really nice. So this would make a great scarf, a great blanket, a wonderful cowl. You could make a matching accessory to go along with these things. So I wanted to just share with you the construction of the stitches, so that way you had a good jumping off point so you could design your own projects based on that. Okay, so I'm going to be just doing a small sample of how the stitch is made. Now, I am a stitch diagram person. I really, really love stitch diagrams. They help me to understand how the stitches fit together, how they relate to each other, so I oftentimes work off of those. I just want to let you know that the patterns were written in just written language. They're all written out. There's a full tutorial so you can watch it all in action. But here, while I'm teaching, I'm going to be using these stitch diagrams to kind of explain how the stitches fit. So if you're new to stitch diagrams, if you take a look at a stitch diagram, there's always some sort of key that tells you what the symbols represent. So for example, these little ovals down here, those are represented here. Those are chain stitches right here. So those are chains. These are also chains. And then these sort of taller T stitches, those are representing half double crochets. So you can see that right here in the key. These darker ovals, like the filled in ovals, those are slip stitches. And then if you look up in the next row, you start to see some stitches with little lines below them. That means we're working in the back loop, and we'll get into that in just a minute. So that's the real difference there. Okay, so to work on something in this stitch pattern, it is a multiple of 8. However, you can kind of change that a little bit. You can do any multiple of 8, and then you could subtract 4 stitches or add 4 stitches onto that, either way, if it fits better with your design and the size you're going for. So what I mean by that, I know that was a little confusing. If you take a look here, we have this repeat. So we've got some half double crochet stitches, some slip stitches, half double crochets, slip stitches. Okay, so this is 4 stitches, 4 stitches. And then you can see this section right here repeats right there. So we have really a repeat of 8 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's an 8 stitch repeat. However, you might find that if you're working on something, especially if you're working on something in a slightly thicker yarn, you might not want to do a full 8 stitch repeat. That might make it too wide or something like that. So you can do 8 stitch repeats, and then when you need it just a little wider, you can add 4 stitches on. So just to explain that a little further, here we see the exact same stitch diagram above as below, except for this little section over here. So we worked the 8 stitch repeat, so 1, 2, there are 2 repeats, and then we did a half of a repeat right here, and it still looks really good, worked up into the stitch pattern. And you can see when you look at this, that one side of it mirrors the other. So if you were working this up and you wanted your piece to look completely symmetrical, if you folded it in half and you wanted to have it look exactly symmetrical with the stitch pattern, you may want to add those extra 4 stitches, like the half of a repeat on the end. Okay, but it still looks good like this. It just looks like, you know, it's a little shifted here, a little shifted there, a little shifted here. You can see that it isn't, if you divide it in half, it isn't symmetrical, but it still looks like a pattern and like it fits. So there's, you know, multiple different ways to use the stitch pattern. And we'll get into some more variations in just a little bit, but I'm going to be working this up so you can see how all these stitches work together. All right, so we are going to chain 16 stitches because we're going to do 2 repeats of the pattern, just so it's big enough so you guys can see. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So whatever your 8 stitch repeat is, you'll chain that on. And then you can decide if you want the extra 4 stitches. You can chain those 4 on too if you want that sort of symmetrical look. I'm just going to leave it at a 2, 8 and 8. But then you also need to chain on some extra chains to count as a turning chain and nothing more. It's not going to be counted as a stitch. It's just used as a turning chain on that for going across that first row. So we're going to chain 2, and I like to chain these kind of tightly here for the edge of my work here. So I've got 2 more stitches. And now I'm going to start in the 3rd chain from the hook, and I'm going to work 4 half double crochets. Okay, and you can work wherever you want to, wherever you want to into those chains. I almost always like to work into the bottom of my chain. So that means I'm going to, if you see all those little V's stacked up, I'm going to roll it over this way. So you can see all those little dashes, and that's where I'm going to work. So and we're going to skip those turning chains, 1, 2. That means our first stitch is going to go right there. So we yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop. Now we have 3 loops on our hook. Yarn over and pull through 3. That's a half double crochet. That is our first stitch of the row. If you are newer to crochet, I would highly recommend marking your first and last stitch of the row, especially when you're working on these projects and you're ending up with this slip stitch pattern on the very edge, because that's really going to help you maintain your stitch count. We're not doing that here. We're just working just this, the center stitch pattern up. All right, so that's the first of our 4 half double crochets. So we're going to do 3 more. So 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to switch to slip stitches. So we're going to do 4 slip stitches. So slip stitch, we just go insert our hook, yarn over, pull up your loop, and then you're going to pull that loop through the loop on your hook. And try not to make these too tight because it gets hard to work into later. So I know that's easier said than done, but when you're pulling it through, it helps to make sure that loop is long enough. Make sure you are not tightening this loop either as you're making those. Okay, so we've got 3 so far, and here's the 4th one. Now we're going to go back to the half double crochets because we're starting over on our repeat. So here's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we're going to go back to those slip stitches. We'll do 4 of those. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, so you can see when you look at this, we have taller stitches, shorter stitches, taller stitches, shorter stitches. So that is really important to the stitch pattern because we're going to be creating sections of taller and shorter, that are going to fit together. They're kind of going to, it almost looks like it's interlocking somewhat. All right, so we're going to start on row number 2. So that starts over here on our chart, and we're going to be working this way across the chart. So we start with 4 slip stitches, and they have those little lines under them, and that means we work them in underneath the back loop. Okay, so to begin, we're going to chain 1, turn our work so we can work across the back side of our work here, or the other side, I should say. We're going to skip that chain 1 turning chain, and we're going to work underneath the back loop. So normally when we make a stitch, we go under both loops. This time we're going under the back loop. And we're just going to grab that yarn, pull through, and pull through the chain on our hook. And we're going to do that 3 more times. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we're going to switch back to half double crochets. 1, and we're working in the back loop all the way across. 2, 3, 4. Now we switch to slip stitches and do 4 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and switch to the half double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Now we are going to, we've just finished row 2, and we're going to start on row 3. Now you can see we've just, here, let me turn this. I'm going to chain 1 and turn like I'm ready to work my next row. So it'll look more like this. You can see it's wider here, wider there, narrower here, narrower there, wider here, wider there. Okay, so you can see those sections are starting to look more dramatic. You know, you can tell these are the half double crochets and that these are the slip stitches. So now, after we've worked 2 rows, now we're going to switch and do the opposite. So wherever there's half double crochets, we're going to do slip stitches, and wherever there's slip stitches, we're going to do half double crochets. And we're going to continue working just in that back loop, okay? So we're going to start out with our slip stitching, because these are half double crochets. So we're going to slip stitch 4 times through that back loop. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we're going to do half double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, split my yarn a little bit there. 4, there we go. And back to slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. And back to half double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to do 2 chains because we ended with a half double crochet. So we're going to do another row of half double crochet. So we have to do a 2 chain turning chain. So 1 and 2. That way it's tall enough for the half double crochets. So when you're about to start a half double crochet, your turning chain should be 2. If you're about to start a slip stitch, then your chain should be 1. Okay, so we're going to do those half double crochets here. 1, 2, 3, 4, just continuing to work in that back loop, and that's what we're going to continue to do throughout this whole fabric here. And now we're doing slip stitches, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and back to half double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, and back to slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll chain 1 and turn. Now, you can take a look at what we've done. You can see these are the 2 rows of half double crochets, 2 rows of slip stitches, 2 rows of half double crochets, 2 rows of slip stitches, and then 2 rows of half double crochet, 2 rows of slip stitches, 2 rows of half double crochet, 2 rows of slip stitches. So think about the stitch pattern as doing, you know, 1 row, and then the next row will have all the same stitches worked into those stitches. So if on the second row, we did half double crochets into half double crochets, slip stitches into slip stitches, okay? And then after those 2 row increments, you switch to the opposite, okay? So then these 2 rows start with those, these 2 rows have slip stitches, half double crochets, slip stitches, half double crochets. So they're the opposite of what's below. And that's what keeps it all even. Things just sort of start nesting. You'll just see that, you know, if you're trying to read your stitches and you take a look here and you can tell, oh, this is pretty wide. I've done 2 rows of half double crochets here. So when I start here, this kind of curves downward. So I know, even if I lost my place, these have to be the half double crochets on this row to start. So because we're starting with a half double crochet, we're starting with a turning chain of 2, and then we're going to work those 4 half double crochets. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and now we're at the taller section, the little hill, And then we do 4 slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we switch back to those half double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll switch back to the slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've only done, you know, that was the first row where we switched it up. Well, let me back up. After doing the 2 slip stitches here, we knew we had to do the half double crochets there, but we have to do that again on a second row. So think of this as being 2 rows at a time, okay? So they match for 2 rows and then it alternates after that, you know, and then it's gonna go back and forth to kind of fill things in. Okay, so, so this, you can see that this is not a hard stitch pattern. You're just alternating between slip stitches and half double crochets, and you're just gonna continue working in that back loop, and it's just gonna create this stitch pattern that looks really complicated, but it really isn't complicated at all. So that's one of the most fun things I think about this project. It's always great when you can come up with a design that looks really tricky, but it's secretly super duper easy. So after I played around with the stitch pattern, I realized that when I started out, I could do some ribbing here back and forth. And so I found a ribbing, which is the yarn over slip stitch through the back loop only. I know that sounds like a lot, but I explain it all in detail in the following tutorials that we're going to be streaming here. That was the perfect height to complement the stitch pattern, and it was really stretchy and elastic and pulls back into shape, and I really liked how it looked along with those stitches. So if you're going to be working back and forth and you want to add that ribbing onto each end, you really have to choose a ribbing that's going to be the right height, right? It can't be too tall or it's going to be all stretched out there. And if it's really tight and small, which I actually originally tried with just a regular slip stitch through the back loop only, not with the yarn over. And that worked fine, but it was just a little bit tight, and I know that that slip stitch pattern is kind of tricky for some people to work up, so I switched it to the yarn over slip stitch pattern. It's okay if you're like, I don't know what that stitch pattern is, Brenda. I'm going to be showing you that in the tutorials that follow this. So I just wanted to point out, like, if you're going to be switching to another kind of ribbing, it has to be a comparable height to the stitches that you're going to be using here for the main stitch pattern. So it has to kind of all even out. So let me show you kind of what that looks like when we switch to making a ribbing on both ends of things. So here's 2 different examples. The only difference between these 2 is that this is just 8 stitch repeat. So here's 8 stitches, here's 8 stitches. And this one has 8 stitches, and then those 4 stitches at the end. We already kind of talked about that. That's the only difference between these 2 charts. But I just wanted to show you, these dots, these kind of darker dots on both ends, those represent the yarn over slip stitch pattern, yarn over slip stitch through the back loop only. So when you're working back and forth, you work in that stitch pattern, you switch over to this stitch pattern, and then you switch back to the ribbing stitch pattern. Okay, so you start in the ribbing, work across the pattern, and then end up in the ribbing. And that way you're able to construct it all at once. You don't have to make separate ribbing pieces and sew them on, or crochet them as you as you go, or whatever. Makes it really simple, really easy, very fun. Looks like I'm a little backed up here with my questions. I'm sorry about that. Let's see. We've got Valeria saying hello from Florida. Jessica, hello from California. Monica, let's see. I think she's probably getting help by now for her question. Betty is saying hello, Betty from Louisiana. Thanks for coming. I'm glad you're here. Let's see. We have someone commenting that they've never used a chart. Looks very easy to follow. These pieces would look great as Christmas gifts. Yes, these would make really good Christmas gifts because the stitch pattern is very versatile. Lots of different people would probably like this stitch pattern. It's not super busy or super, it's just a really nice unisex hat mittens kind of set. Yeah. Let's see. And we've got Dawn is here. Hello, Dawn from Washington State. Let's see. Okay, and Sandra saying hi from Kearney, Missouri. And thank you for being here, Sandra. That was very nice of you to say. Let's see. And Mary is asking to go a little slower. Okay. So everything that I'm going through here, this is sort of like a preview of what you're what you're going to be using in the next two tutorials. So in order to make the hat or in order to make the mitts, those full tutorials from the very beginning, you know, what kind of materials you need and all that stuff, through the stitches, through the, you know, how to make it, that is all going to be streamed after we talk about this. So you're not missing anything on as far as like how to make the mitts or the hat or anything like that. So we're just kind of talking about the stitch pattern, and just know you can definitely go back and watch the things that I've already discussed. You can watch that a couple of times if that helps you, and I'll try to slow down a little bit too. Okay. Alrighty, so we talked a little bit about this. So you've got the stitch pattern in the middle, and then you've got those sort of ribbing sections on the sides, and that is how you create a piece like this, where you've got the ribbing on the edges and then the pattern stitch in the middle there, okay? So after I designed this and had been, you know, asked a couple of times for other types of accessories, and that's when I started working on this hat, I was like, okay, how am I going to turn that same stitch pattern into a hat? And I knew that I wanted it to be oriented in the same direction. And so then I thought, okay, I'll just make it almost the same way as the mitts, except that I'm going to only do ribbing on one end of it and make the ribbing much longer. Okay, so we're going to be doing ribbing, 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 then the pattern stitch. And then since I knew I would have to cinch it in, I kind of wanted to sort of help that process a little bit, and I'll explain that in just a second here when I pull out the chart. Here we go. I know this looks very similar to what we were just looking at, but you can see we have ribbing here only on one side. This is representing the ribbing at the brim, and I mean, it would be much, much longer if I actually put in a symbol for each stitch that I'm actually using. This is just to kind of represent the process of it. You know, there would be more of these stitches as well, you know, for the mitts and for the hat. I should have said that this is just showing the pattern stitch, and you would repeat, you know, sections of this over and over before you'd move on to this. But for making the hat, what I did was we're working this pattern stitch on this section. So we're switching back and forth. You know, we start here, we work a slip stitch there, we work the pattern, and then we do the ribbing pattern and come back, work the ribbing, then we work in our pattern stitch. And then at the end, you can see right here, these are all slip stitches here for that very last stitch. No matter whether you were switching from those 4 half double crochets, you do a slip stitch, but also, even if you were working across with slip stitches, you end with a slip stitch. Now the reason that I did that was because slip stitches are much shorter than the half double crochets. So what this ended up doing was I would work back and forth, and this would be just a regular rectangle, except that this end would get shorter and pull together here on this hat. So you've got, you know, a rectangular piece that we eventually sew into a tube, but that initial little slip stitch here starts to pull in that end a little. So we do end up having, you know, there is a little bit of a hole here at the top, and then we fill that all in later with stitches. We work into the edges of our rows, but that slip stitch that we make here, it just helps that hat come in just a little bit before we start to do that little circle at the top of the hat. So it's just a little trick I like to use sometimes if I'm working something sideways and I know, you know, if it's going to be a hat and I know it has to close in a little. Sometimes I will do something called short rows here, which we're not going to get into because that's a whole nother live event. But this is sort of almost a similar feel where you're making shorter stitches. They're shorter in height all along here, and when they stack up, they are quite a bit shorter than how tall this fabric is going to be next to it. Okay, I hope that's making sense. But this, you know, if that doesn't make sense, it's okay. You're still going to be able to make those 2 projects by following through those 2 tutorials. This is just more sort of like background for those of you who are interested in doing some of your own designs, and just a way to look at this stitch pattern a little bit more in depth so that you could use it for something, you know, of your own design. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is when you're working on this project, and you may have noticed this with my little sample, the edge of my piece is wiggly here. So it's kind of curved, and that worked in my favor for these 2 projects, because when you finish up the other side of the rectangle, it's also wavy, and the waves interlock. They fit right into here, and it helps you sew it together. It also helps your seam blend in a little better with that wiggly seam instead of just a straight seam, and it looks really nice. So that's no problem if you're making something that's going to become a tube. However, I wanted to bring this up because if you're thinking, oh, I would love to use this to make, something like a scarf or a blanket or something like that, and you want the edge to be straight here, if that is the case, then you need to start by just skipping the very first row in this chart. So what that would do, let me just actually let me go back to my original. So this is showing the chart without the ribbing. Okay, we're back to that again, no more ribbing. And I'm gonna just fold this over so that you guys can't, if you just imagine, here's row number 1, we're just gonna skip that row there. And we would start with a chain, so your chain would be going in this direction, and then you'd have a one chain for a turning chain, and then you would start with those slip stitches here. They wouldn't be through the back loop yet because you have no back loop, but you'd be working those slip stitches, and then half double crochet stitches, slip stitches, half double crochet. Okay, so basically you'd just be skipping one row at the beginning, and what that does is it makes the edge nice and straight. So I did a little sample showing what that would look like. Let's see, I'll put it right here so you guys can kind of see. Let me see here. Oh yeah, okay. So you can see the edge of this is straighter. So this edge right here, I don't know if you can, there are stitches right here. Let me pull that out of the shadow a little bit. So this edge is nice and straight right there. And this edge is kind of wavy and curly because we've got half double crochet before we switch. Here, we've just got one row of the half double crochets, and then we're switching to the slip stitches here already. So it's like we have half of the repeat, half of the row, because we have to think about this as doing them in pairs, matching sets. So half double crochet, then we switch, slip stitch, right? So here we're doing just one row, and then we switch. And then after that point, after we start working that second row here, we're back on track to working in pairs again. It's just for that preliminary row. We just have to get rid of that very first row in the chart in order to make a straight edge. And then to finish up, you can see here, here's a row of the half double crochets and a row of the half double crochets here. And then if you take a look here, we've got half double crochets, slip stitches, half double crochets, slip stitches, and that just nests into those curves there, and it makes a nice straight edge along this side. So we don't make another repeat of the same, where we've got the half double crochets here, slip stitches, half slip stitches. I hope that is making sense to you guys. I just wanted to point that out just in case someone was looking to use the stitch pattern for something where they, like a scarf or something where they wanted it to be a rectangle and have those nice straight edges. They don't want to have the curves. I did make one more sample to kind of illustrate this in case that was kind of confusing. Here is a sample that I made in 2 colors. So what I did was I started out with my 2 rows. So I have got 2 rows here in this wheat color, and then I did 2 rows in the sort of coal color, and 2 rows in wheat, 2 rows in coal. So each one of these, you can kind of see these little shapes. That is, I changed the color every other row, okay? So not every row gets its own color, it's every other row. So I did them in pairs. So 1, 2, switch the color, 1, 2, switch the color. So that way I just carried my color all the way up the edge, switching back and forth between those 2 colors. And it made kind of a fun pattern, but I also wanted to do this to just show you, you can see how this wiggles back and forth when you do those 2 rows. If I had only done the second row and then switched to the, after that to doing them in sets of 2 after that, then this would have been a straight edge here. It would have basically been cut off. Here, let me just hide the part. It would have looked more like this, okay? So you've got that one, and then you switch to doing, 2 rows of the next color, 2 rows of the next color. I hope this is making it make a little bit more sense. I'm just kind of trying to group the like rows together. But while I was making the sample, I also discovered, a little happy accident here. I looked at I thought the front would look really cool, which I think it does, and it's nice and stretchy and it looks kind of fun. But I loved what happened on the back. This almost looks like plaid to me. Like it has all these really pretty little areas where the stitches kind of come through to the other color. So you can kind of see how stretchy this is. This is just a nice fabric. But I really, really loved this back. So I wanted to bring this in here to show you guys how cool is that you can just do, you know, changing the color every 2 stitches, or sorry, every 2 rows. It makes this really awesome stitch pattern, and it looks so much more complicated than it actually is. It looks like some kind of fancy color work situation that we did, but really it's just, you know, you're only working with 1 color throughout that row. So that was a fun little bonus. I learned a lot of things when I prep stuff for you guys. I learned a lot of things, and I'm always so happy like when something like this happens and I can share it with you guys, because that was just kind of a fun little unexpected thing to happen there. All right, let me just run through my little comments here. We've got lots of hellos. Clara from Northwest Florida, hello. I hope the weather's okay there. And Danielle saying hey from New York City. Hi Danielle, thanks for being here. We got Catherine from New Jersey, and yeah, let's see, where do you find the chart that you're using? Well, this is a chart that I just made for this presentation, but if you're interested in downloading the chart, I can make that available later. I'll talk to my coworkers here and try to figure out how to do that later, so that you guys can see that. Okay, oh yeah, because it looks like a couple of you are asking about that would be helpful to have. Okay, so just so you know, if those are going to become a download, I just want to make sure that you know that these are not exactly the pattern instructions for the mitts or for the hat. These are just more like a teaching tool for me to explain the stitch pattern to you guys. So I just want to make sure you know that there aren't like the exact correct amount of stitches here for the mitt. Like you couldn't just only work off of the charts. You'll have to be referring to the directions in your download as well. So this would be more just for like understanding the relationship between all the stitches that we're using. So yeah, I will talk to my people here and we'll see about figuring out a way that we can make that into a PDF download for you guys. Okay, thank you for putting that in the comments. These are things that I like to know about, like if things would help you. Sometimes I feel like, am I the only person who really loves charts? I don't know. So it's helpful for me to know if those are helpful for you guys too. So, all right. Oh, we have a couple of compliments about the color changing. Awesome. Okay, and looks like the weather's okay in Florida right now. That's good. I just heard you guys are having a storm coming. I have a friend who lives there, so. All right. Oh, and we have a hello from Panama and from Istanbul. Wow, you guys are all over the place. That's so cool. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. And I think I've answered all the questions we've got so far. So we're gonna get on to streaming the tutorials for the mitts. And then after that, we're gonna do the hat, the beanie hat. So hope you guys enjoy that. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Take care and happy crocheting, everybody. Bye. Welcome to our live crochet event. I'm Brenda KB Anderson, and I'm so happy that you joined me. Today, I'm going to be teaching you how to make the Woodland mitts. This is such a cute little fingerless mitten pattern. It's quick. It makes a great holiday gift. And so I'm going to be showing you everything you need to know, to all the stitches and how the mitt is constructed. We'll be going through all of that so you'll know how to make them. So let's get started. Let me introduce you to the mitts. So there's 2 sizes in this pattern. There's the small medium size, which should fit small and medium size hands. I'm mostly women or teens hands. If you want to make them larger, there is one larger size. This size is about 3/4 of an inch bigger. And you can even customize further beyond that. as well, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. So the mittens are worked actually back and forth in turned rows. Let me show you what this looks like. When you are, just before you seam it together, this is what your piece will look like. I'm just giving you the little overview here, and we'll get into all the stitches next. So they're worked back and forth in turned rows, and you skip some stitches for the thumb hole, and then you fold your mitt, and then you slip stitch, you do a little slip stitch seam at the end. So they're super simple. And the cool thing about this is that it looks really complicated to me. Like, it looks like a fun cable pattern. It actually looks kind of like knitting, like you're switching the stitches back and forth and you're working it in this direction, but secretly it's worked this way, and secretly it's crocheted, and secretly it's so much easier. So there's only really 3 different stitches across here, and I'll show you how to work each of them. But I just wanted to show you kind of the anatomy of the mitten so that it makes a little more sense when you're looking at the pattern. So there's a little section here at the beginning. This is worked in a yarn over slip stitch. And then this section here where you get the cool kind of, it almost looks like tree bark, or the kind of cable-y section here. This is going back and forth between working slip stitches, half double crochet, slip stitches, half double crochet, and then you do that for 2 rows, and then on the next 2 rows you do half double crochet, slip stitch, half double crochet, slip stitch. So you're just alternating those stitches. That's all written in the pattern. You don't have to worry if what I just said was like, okay, I didn't catch all that. I will be showing you how to do all that. I just wanted to make you notice that there's a little stitch pattern change between the yarn over slip stitch and then the kind of cable-y looking pattern. It's not really cables, but we'll call it that. And then there's another little section of the yarn over slip stitch pattern at the end. So normally I would ask people to make a gauge, but because these are so little, and also secretly because, confession time, I hate making gauge swatches. I was trying to make this easier for those of you who also hate making gauge swatches. And don't pick up my bad habits, though. Gauge swatches are good and they're helpful. But in this case, you can get away with just starting on the mitt and then measuring it as you go. So in the pattern, there's a couple of checkpoints, and you just want to check and make sure that your gauge is on. If your mitt is a lot bigger, if it's turning out bigger than mine, then you're going to want to start over and go down a hook size. And if it's turning out smaller, you're going to want to start over and go up a hook size. So once you begin, then you'll be checking your gauge as you go. So let's get started on making one of these. We're going to begin with a chain of 41 stitches. Looks like we have a couple of comments. I'm just going to check those while I'm doing my 41 chains. I see Kim says she only crochets blankets, but she's never made hat or mitts. Well, maybe after this you will be inspired to do that. But blankets, man, those take a long time. I haven't actually made that many blankets because I have sort of a short attention span, but I really admire them, that is for sure. And somebody already started the mittens yesterday. Awesome. Cool. Okay, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41. One thing I want to say about this chain is because of the stitch pattern, it tends to kind of pull the stitches in a little. I think it's because of the slip stitches, actually. They make them a little tighter. So usually there's so much emphasis put on making your crochet chain really loose. And I'm not saying you should make a tight one, but I don't think you have to intentionally make it loose because your stitch pattern will kind of shrink it in a little. But do make it as loose as you need to easily get your hook into the stitches. And speaking of that, I love working into the bottom of my chain instead of the top where we normally work because it's easier for me to get my hook into the stitches, and it also makes a neater, tidier edge. So that's what I'm going to be doing on my first row. So the bottom of the chain, that means if you take a look at this, if you take a look at your chain, you see all these little V's sitting on top. If you flip it over like that, you will see all these little horizontal dashes. Those are where we're going to be working. We're going to be working underneath those. So we're going to skip the first dash because that first chain counts as a turning chain and we will never work into that. So in this pattern. So we're going to skip that and go into the second bump. And then we're going to start working our first row. So the first row, we're going to do 6 yarn over slip stitches. Now, this is how you work a yarn over slip stitch. You'll yarn over, and then we're going to go into the second bump, just right in front of my thumbnail there. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then see how I'm grabbing this with my thumb here to kind of anchor it? Then we're going to continue pulling that same loop through those two to complete the yarn over slip stitch. Let me show you that a few more times. Yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up your loop, and then pull through 2. Yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up your loop, and pull through 2. Now, if you've already crocheted a bit before and you know what a half double crochet is, this is very similar to a half double crochet except that you don't do that last yarn over. Okay, so yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull it up, and continue pulling through 2. So far we have 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches. We'll do 2 more. And there we have our 6 yarn over slip stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is a good note, especially if you haven't worked in this stitch pattern before. Sometimes it gets kind of hard to see where your first and last stitches are. I mean, or any time, not even just the stitch pattern, just in general. I think that is one of the tricky things about learning how to crochet is just realizing where your first and last stitches are. So just to alleviate any of that questioning, is this my stitch? Is that my stitch? I don't know if that's a stitch. Is that the turning chain? What is this, right? Just put a stitch marker in that first stitch, and then you can put a stitch marker in the last stitch as well. And then you'll just always know for sure that those are the first and last stitches. All right, so we did our 6 yarn over slip stitches. Then we're going to repeat the section that goes 4 half double crochets, 4 slip stitches. Now the slip stitches are not going to be the yarn over slip stitches. They will just be a regular slip stitch. So I'll show you the difference in a minute. So we're going to do 4 half double crochets. So we'll yarn over, insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop. This is looking just like what we just did, right? Except right now we're going to yarn over. We're doing an additional yarn over and pulling through 3 loops. Okay, so that's a half double crochet. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull it up, yarn over, pull through 3. Okay, we're going to do that 2 more times. And here's the last time. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. There's our 4 half double crochets. Now we're going to do 4 slip stitches. So this is just inserting your hook and pulling up a loop and pulling it through that loop. Okay? So insert your hook, pull up a loop, pull through the loop on your hook. Those are slip stitches. So we've got 2 more to do. 1, 2. And on these slip stitches, it's very, very easy to accidentally make them very tight. It's super common for people to make really tight slip stitches. And it's because nothing holds this. Well, actually, let me just show you. If you insert your hook and pull, whoops, let me get it in the right spot. Okay, so if you pull up your loop, watch what happens to this loop right here. If you pull it through here, see how you can make it shrink to really tight by accident? I kind of exaggerated that. You know, nobody probably does it that much, but you have to watch that loop as you're pulling through because it can get really tight. And then on the next row, it gets harder to work into your stitches. So just keep your eye on that. So we've done, let's see, 1, 2, 3 slip stitches. We're going to do our last slip stitch for that. And now we're going to repeat. So we have 6 yarn over slip stitches, 4 half double crochets, and then 4 slip stitches right here. So we're going to do 4 half double, 4 slip, 4 half double, 4 slip stitch across until there are only 6 stitches left. So right now I'm doing the half double crochets, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then now we're going to do slip stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 half doubles, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 slip stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to do 4 half doubles, and then we'll only have 6 stitches left. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So now you should just have 6 stitches left, and you're going to do 6 yarn over slip stitches just like we did at the very beginning. And you can see our little pattern is starting to form. We've got taller stitches, taller, shorter, taller, shorter, taller. So as you'll notice, when we start with half double crochets at the beginning, we're also going to end with them at the beginning and end of that little center section. Okay, so the 4 that you start with are also the 4 that you end with. So now we're going to do yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull it up, pull through 2. That's your yarn over slip stitch. And you know, these stitches are all related to each other. They're all very similar. The slip stitch is not that different from the yarn over slip stitch, and the yarn over slip stitch is not that different from a half double crochet. So this is really super good practice for learning the difference between all 3 and being able to do them automatically. And this is definitely always the first row on any project is always the hardest. Probably should have made my chain just a touch bigger. Okay, let me see how many we have here. I was losing track. 1, 2, 3, 4 half double crochets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yarn over slip stitches, and 1 more here at the end. There we go. And now we're going to do a turning chain, and then we're going to flip our work over and then work across. So when I make these turning chains, whenever I'm working a yarn over slip stitch pattern, make your turning chains kind of tight. You're never going to work into them, so it doesn't matter, and it helps to keep the edge from stretching out too much. Makes it look a little neater and tidier, so I make them just slightly tighter than I normally would. So make your turning chain, turn your work, and now we're going to do the exact same thing we just did, except this time we're working in the back loops of everything. So the back loop is normally when you insert your hook under your stitch like this would be your front loop, this is your back loop. Normally you go under both of them, but this time we are going to go down through there just to catch the back loop. And from this point on, we're going to go back and forth and back and forth on these mittens. Every stitch you make is going to be into that back loop. So you don't even have to think about it. So just from now on, ignore that front loop. All right, so we're making 6 yarn over slip stitches like we always do here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and now we've gotten to the half double crochet section. We're working half double crochets and all the half double crochets, slip stitches and all the slip stitches on this row, okay? So we're just going to do exactly the same thing that we just did on the last row, except that this time we're just working in that back loop of each stitch. Okay, so there's 4 half double crochets. Oh, I forgot to mention what hook size I'm using. Thank you for asking that, Shannon. I'm using an F 3.75 millimeter hook, and that is written in the pattern, so you'll have that. But you'll use whatever hook size you need to in order to get the gauge to be the same as mine. And somebody else, Anya is asking, how long does it take to make a set of mittens? If you're an experienced crocheter, it probably takes maybe like 3 hours or so. If you are just starting out, the first one will take you a lot longer and the second one will be a lot quicker. But this is definitely an approachable, maybe a second or third crochet project. Once you've made a square, a dishcloth, or something like that, you can definitely do this. This would be a good project for people who are just starting out. Oh, Florence wants to know if I made the sweater that I'm wearing. I did make the sweater, and actually, I didn't even think about this until right now, but this entire sweater is made out of the yarn over slip stitch pattern. So the pattern that we're doing right here on the edge, the whole sweater is made out of that. That's funny. All right, I'm just continuing to do my half double crochets and my slip stitches across, alternating between them until there are only 6 stitches left. And then that's where we're going to do the yarn over slip stitches again. Oh, Toya says when she's making blankets, she listens to audiobooks, and the next thing she knows, it's done. Yeah, that actually would be really helpful. Sometimes I'm kind of a Netflix binger, but then I can't watch anything that's too good because then my crochet suffers for it. So I have to find like the perfect balance of like just interesting enough that it's not annoying to watch and that it's helping me pass the time while I'm working on something that takes a long time. But not so good that I could just get all distracted and then I have to rip stuff out. Or sometimes I just find myself doing this while I'm crocheting. It can't be too good. All right, so I've done my last 4 half double crochets here, and I'm going to do 6 yarn over slip stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, so now you can see even more that there's a difference between the height of the half double crochets and the slip stitches here. And it's, going in and out and in and out. On the next row, those are going to help us to determine what stitch we're doing. So this is going to look very similar to the previous 2 rows, except the difference is we're going to be switching up. Instead of doing half double crochets here, we're going to do the slip stitches here. So we're going to do 4 slip stitches, 4 half double crochets, 4 slip, 4 half double crochet across, and then just making sure you do the yarn over slip stitches at the beginning and at the end. So I'll show you what that looks like. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and now this is gonna prompt us because this is so tall. We know we're doing short stitches, so everything will even out in the end, right? One thing when I was working on this pattern, I took note that when I am traveling in the direction of my yarn tail, that means I am switching whatever stitch I was doing from the previous row. So on this row, instead of doing the tall stitch, I'm going to do the short stitch because I'm traveling towards this yarn tail. On the reverse, when you're traveling away from your yarn tail, you're going to do exactly the same thing you did on the previous row. So you're matching what you did. So I'll show you that when we get there, because I think it'll be a little confusing if I just say it and there's no stitches there to look at. But so here we have our first 6 yarn over slip stitches, and now because we're going toward our yarn tail, we're going to do 4 slip stitches, 1, and we're still working just under that back loop, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to do half double crochets here, 4 of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 slip stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 half doubles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 slip stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I'm doing half doubles, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see, somewhere I think I got off by 1 stitch. Let me check. 2, 3, 4. I think it was way back here. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. It just didn't look like it was quite lining up right, because I realized I was starting to do a half double crochet into another half double crochet, and you're not going to be doing that when you change it up. So you can see that this is starting to, you're kind of filling in all those little valleys as you work across on this one. That helps prompt you to know which stitch you're supposed to be doing. And like I said, if you're going toward that yarn tail, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like I skipped a stitch. I think that was actually what my problem was. I think I skipped a stitch on the previous row and a slip stitch. So instead, if this happens to you and you realize when you get to this stitch that you're going to be working. Oh no, actually, I think that was right. 1, 2, okay. Back to our half double crochets. It is okay to add a little stitch in there, to do 2 into 1 stitch if you realize that you messed up and you skipped a stitch. You can, of course, you can just rip it out to wherever you were at, but if you're wondering whether you're going to notice that, if you just sneak 2 little stitches into a slip stitch, because you only had 3 slip stitches and you kind of missed a stitch somewhere, you can just do it and look at it and see. If you can't tell, then it's okay. Nobody's gonna, come inspect it and tell you did it wrong. I feel like sometimes we just are so worried about making mistakes. 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm gonna do it right here. I'm gonna show you. Because I don't have enough slip stitches here, this is the problem that I was having. I got to this point and there's only 3 slip stitches. So we're just going to put an extra half double crochet into the same spot we just did a half double crochet, and that's going to even it out on the next row. And no one's going to notice that. Except you guys, because I just told you. So that's our little secret. All right, so we ended with, remember we began with 4 slip stitches here and we ended with 4 slip stitches here. Okay, we're alternating in the middle and we're starting to kind of fill in those little valleys. So we're going to do 6 yarn over, slip stitches at the end, 3, and see how it's a little hard to tell if that was a stitch or not? I should have marked that, so that way you would know for sure, but there is one more stitch there. Another way to tell if you didn't have a marker in is you can see there's a stitch down here, and it doesn't like, you can kind of match up this stitch with that stitch, and then this one doesn't have a little buddy above it. So we're just gonna find that little loop in the back, and we'll mark it this time. So then you're gonna do a tight turning chain and flip your work, and you are gonna continue across this row. And remember, when you're going away from the yarn tail, here's the yarn tail, that means you're repeating what you did on the row before. So you're gonna do the yarn over slip stitches, and then because these stitches you just did were slip stitches right there, you're gonna do slip stitches in the same spot, half double crochets, slip, half double crochet, slip, half double crochet, slip stitches, and 60 yarn overs. And if you complete all of that, it'll look like this. So this will be like, whoops, it would have been turned this way after you worked your way across. And you can see now it's kind of a uniform thickness. Yes, it wiggles back and forth, but you've filled in those thin spots, and then you've, you know, added a thin section across where it was thicker. So you're kind of evening it out. This is a 4-row repeat in the mitten. So you have to you do 2 of the same, so half double, and then in the next one you switch it up and you do slip stitch right there in that spot. Does that make sense? So you're going to do 2 this way and back of the same, then you switch it up and you do this way and back of the alternating pattern. So when I designed these mitts, I realized that I had to add and subtract the width with 4-row repeats. So when I wanted to make these a little bit bigger, I couldn't just add 2 rows before the thumb hole. Here, let me show you. I couldn't do 2 rows before the thumb hole because that's going to mess up the thumb hole. So what I ended up doing was I added for the left mitten, here I'll just put this in my hand so you can see. For the left mitten, I added the 4 rows into the top, so that would make the seam be a little bit further down. And then for the right mitten, I added them into the top of the right mitten as well. So it happens on the right mitten when you're working for the larger size. This is only for the larger size. You can follow the pattern. You don't have to completely understand what I'm saying if it doesn't make sense. But if you're looking at the pattern, you're like, why is this written so strangely? It's because I'm adding 4 rows into this section before the thumb and 4 rows after the thumb, depending on which hand you're working, instead of 2 and 2. So anyway, you will have worked all 4 of these, and then you're going to continue working in this stitch pattern until you've worked 18 rows. So what that looks like is this. Here's 18 rows, and it might be kind of confusing to count this, but let me show you how I do it. So if you're working and working, you're watching a good movie, and you're like, I have no idea how many rows I have here. Well, this is the easiest way for me to count it, is I count the half double crochets. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So every little kind of leafy shape, there's a half double crochet row here and a half double crochet here, and then it alternates and it's over here the next time. So if you count them that way, it'll be an easy way to count your rows, and you'll know you've done 18. Or if you're making the if you're making the larger size mittens, then for one of the hands you're gonna have 4 extra in there, so you'll be up to 22 rows. But just look at your pattern; it'll tell you what to do. So after you've done that, you are gonna work the thumb hole. So here we are. So in order to do the thumb hole, let me just check. We've got a couple more comments and questions. Let's see. Oh, Alicia, she says, hello, I love how easy the pattern is to work. Thank you, Alicia. Yes, I do too. I love it when things look tricky, but they're secretly easy. Those are the best. How do I do this as a left-hander? Okay, that's a good question, Susan. If you watch the video, and you can reverse it on your screen, or if you can't do that, you can watch it in a mirror. Then it'll look exactly like I'm left-handed, just like you. So then you can just follow along. All the directions should be written the same way. There's nothing about going left to right or anything like that in the directions. So if you are, if you're pretty much, I would say almost all the time in crochet, or at least the stuff that I work on, that if you're wondering, like, how does this video relate to me? I'm crocheting from the opposite side. You're just looking at a mirror image of, basically you're crocheting in a mirror image of a right-handed person. So if you just look at the right-handed person in the mirror, then you'd be looking at what it would look like for you to do it. So let's see. If there's anything else. Will acrylic yarn work with these? Yes, acrylic, you can definitely use acrylic yarn. Let's talk about the yarn for a second. I should have talked about that at the beginning. I'm glad you asked this question. So I used a CYCA number 3 and a CYCA number 2. So in these two different samples. But weirdly, okay, so CYCA, that's just sort of the yarn standard to tell you how thick, the weight of your yarn, how much room it takes up. But weirdly, this is a CYCA, this is a sport weight yarn. It's labeled as a sport weight yarn, but it actually, to me, is a little bit thicker than this yarn, which is more of a light worsted or DK weight is how it's labeled. So this is a good example of how the CYCA numbers aren't always, it isn't always easy to tell if one yarn is thicker than the other. It's giving you a guideline, though, a place to start. So if you just do a swatch with your, back to the acrylic yarn thing. If you do a swatch with your yarn, you should start out with either a CYCA number 3 or a number 2, and just do a swatch and see how it's turning out. You can also, if your yarn is a little thicker, you can go down a hook size and make your mitts just a little bit stiffer. You can also do the opposite, make them with a little more drape if your yarn is a little bit thinner. So you can just do a little, start working on the mitt and check your gauge and see how it's going in order to substitute. Let's see. To clarify my question, will medium weight acrylic yarn work? Oh, sorry, I didn't see that until now. I would not use a medium weight because I think a medium weight is going to be too large. Although, if you're feeling adventurous, you could just do this or work the pattern up, but then do fewer repeats. So do four less repeats than what I'm doing here, and that might give you. You could just check it and monitor your piece just to see if it's working. I mean, the cool thing about these mittens is as you're working it, you can just sort of try it on your hand and see, like, is this gonna work? Before you put the thumb hole in, when you put the thumb hole in, you can just keep checking. So, and then I have alpaca yarn that's a number 1 or number 2. Should I double or triple the yarn? I have several skeins. I think you're just gonna have to test it. It's really hard to tell. If you've got a number 2, you can maybe put the 1, are you going to do them together, the 1 and the 2? Or you're not sure if it's a 1 or a 2? If it's in between a 1 and a 2, I would definitely double it and then just check your gauge. Because I think it's too hard to know for sure unless you actually check your gauge. Just start on it and see how it's going. Okay, so now we're going to work the thumb hole row. We're going to start out with our yarn over slip stitches. So we're going to do 6 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I lost my loop there. 5, 6. And then we're going to do slip stitch in the back loop for just 2 stitches. 1, 2. Then we're going to chain 8, and this is because we're making a little gap where the thumb hole is going to go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we're going to skip the next 8 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we're going to slip stitch through the back loop of the next 2. 1, 2, See how we made that little gap there? And now we're going to continue working in our pattern. So we're going to do 4 half double crochets, because remember we're going toward this. So we'll do 4 half double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 slip stitches. We're still continuing just to work through the back loops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 half double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 slip stitches here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll do our 6 yarn over slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, we're going to yarn over, or chain 1 and turn, and now I'm going to show you how to work across here and work into this thumb. So we're going to continue in our stitch pattern. So we're just doing yarn over slip stitches across the first 6 stitches here. And then we're going to continue. This is basically like a repeat of the last pattern, so, or the last row, sorry. So we're doing 4 slip stitches here into our slip stitches. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're doing 4 half doubles. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 half doubles. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now we're getting to the exciting part. And now we're going to do 12 slip stitches, okay? So, you know, our pattern would be 4 half doubles, 4 slip, and then we would normally be doing half doubles here. But because I want to make this a wider hole for the thumb, we're just going to be slip stitching all the way across. So, well, not all the way across, but we're slip stitching for 12 slip stitches. So 1, 2, so there'll be 2 slip stitches into the fabric, and then 8 slip stitches into that chain. Let's see, where are you, little loop? Okay, I made that stitch a little tight. Okay, now we're going to be slip stitching into the chain, and you can slip stitch under both stitches, or under both parts, loops of the chain, the front and the back, but I'm just doing it in the back because it's easier, and it's kind of within our pattern too. So we're doing our slip stitches across, 1 in each chain across that thumb for a total of 8 in the chain. And then we're going to do 2 more slip stitches into the end. And then we should have 6 stitches left. Oops, I think I need to do 1 more slip stitch here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 more stitches left. So those are all yarn over slip stitches. 1, 2. And then after you've worked this thumb hole, then you're going to just go right back into working those same 4 row repeats until your pattern tells you you're done. So you just keep going back and forth doing those pattern repeats, and then you will have a piece that looks like this, or if you're doing the larger size, depending on which hand, it'll be a little longer here or a little longer here. And then the last thing to do is to seam it closed. So if you wanted to, you could just a regular, you could fasten off, or you could just use your yarn, a long yarn tail, to whip stitch it together if you like, but this is a little quicker, for me anyway. So, and I think that it still looks pretty good in the pattern. If you take, so this is where you would have ended up. You can turn your work as if you're going to work one more row. And then you're going to fold your mitten this way, and you're going to put the foundation chain, that's the one with your little beginning yarn tail, put it directly behind the last row that you worked, okay? So it's just sitting right behind, and you're going to match up your stitches. So you're going to put your crochet hook through, let's see, I'll do one little chain here to make it a little easier. And you're going to put your hook through the front loop. Here, let me show you. This could be a little confusing because the yarn over slip stitch has an extra little bar on it in the front. So there's a bar there, but then if you look at the top of your work, there's the front loop and there's the back loop. We're going to be working underneath the front loop of the row in front. And when we put our hook directly behind, we're going to work through the back loop of the row behind. So if you think about it, you're working underneath one loop from each layer, and they're the loops that are the furthest away from each other, okay? So we'll go through the front here and the back loop here. And then you'll just yarn over, pull up your loop, and pull it right through to do a slip stitch. So let's do that a couple more times. Slip stitch through the back. Okay, so you're inserting it through the front loop, and then you're inserting it through the back loop, and you're pulling it up. Front, front. Just like that, and I'll show you what it looks like. So you end up with this nice little ridge that looks very similar to how these look. So it kind of blends in. It'll connect. Here, I'll show you on one that's finished. There's the slip stitch seam. It's right here. You can see that, you can kind of see it because it sticks out just a little bit. But if you block these at the end, you can block them flat before you seam them, but you don't have to. I didn't. I just waited until I seamed it all together, and then I blocked them. So because I use an animal fiber, I like to block animal fibers. Usually I like to block them by just getting them wet, soaking them. You just get them wet and just sort of gently squeeze out the water. You don't want to wring it or anything. I roll it up in a towel and just push down on it to get most of the water out, and then arrange it and let it dry. But you can also block things if you're in a hurry, like I sometimes am. Even if it is a wool thing or an animal fiber thing, you can steam block things. You can just fill your iron up with water and put it on a high steam setting. So that might mean you might even have it hotter than you normally would. You don't have to put it on the wool setting, even though it says wool, because you're not actually going to don't actually touch your garment with your iron. You're just going to hold it above and press the steam button if you have a steam button, and that just sends the steam down, and you can kind of pat things into place. Sometimes you have, like if you get it nice and steamy, it helps it relax, and then you can kind of do this and push your little lines, make that seam look really super perfect, and then it kind of blends in. But like I said before, these, I wanted to give you guys some good options for quick Christmas gifts. They're actually pretty fast. And what I like to do is I like to give these to people with one of those inexpensive pair of those little stretchy fingerless mittens. So, because I live in Minnesota and it's super cold here, and it seems like a little bit nicer to give somebody a little extra warmth when you're giving it to them at a super cold time of the year. But really, you can wear these anytime. And actually, my sister wears them all the time, even indoors. So they make an awesome gift for drafty houses or, weathering outside if you're walking around in the woods in your woodland mitts. Welcome everybody to our live crochet event. I'm Brenda KB Anderson, and I am very excited today to show you my newest design. It's the Woodland Beanie. So it's a very nice, stretchy, warm, kind of all-purpose hat. This looks great on lots of different kind of, people, different size heads, different tastes in clothing. It's just a good kind of basic beanie with a little something extra because it's got this nice fold-up brim and this really beautiful texture. And so this is actually, I designed this as a companion piece for the Woodland mitts. They've been really popular. They're fingerless mittens that I designed, I think maybe even like a year and a half ago. It was a while ago. But people keep making them, and I thought, well, maybe we should have a set because I don't know. I just really love the stitch pattern, and a couple people had asked me to make a hat version of those mitts too. So here it is. All right, well, I'm so glad that you guys are here. Thank you so much for joining me. I always love it when you guys are active in the chat and then you say hello, or you tell me where you're crocheting from, or you ask questions. Certainly if I'm going through anything in my project that is confusing, or if you just have random questions, that's great too. But I am going to be walking you through all of the steps today on how to make your own Woodland Beanie. And there is a free pattern download, the Woodland Beanie. You can find that link in the chat or in the description. And go ahead and download that. You can do that now so you can follow along, or you will have access to that later, no problem. You can just go back and get that if you just want to watch this for now. But certainly ask me questions, if there's anything that you guys are wondering, or if you need me to go over something again. I just want to make sure that I am being clear. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we need here. So this beanie comes in, I think it's 5 sizes. Let me just double check here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sizes. Yep, so we have baby, which is this cute little version. And when I say baby, I mean like a little baby, probably like maybe up to 6 months or so. But anything older than that, I would go with the toddler size probably. I always err on the side of making a slightly larger hat because, when they're growing, because it'll fit eventually. And you don't want to make a hat that's too small, but these, keeping in mind though that these are pretty darn stretchy. So I do have a guideline in your pattern. I tell you the sizes they're kind of aimed for. So baby, toddler, child, adult, and a large adult. And then I tell you what the finished circumference is, and I also tell you kind of how to choose your size. So you're going to be, if you measure your head or the recipient's head and measure where you would wear your hat, so wherever the brim of, the ribbed section of your hat would be, and then you are going to make it either 3 or 4 inches, depending on the size, smaller than your head measures. And maybe that sounds crazy, but you really want this hat to be snug on your head so it stays in place, when you're going sledding or whatever you're doing in this very warm hat. So you definitely want it to be smaller than your head measures, okay? And if you're in between sizes and you just cannot decide, what I would recommend is go for the larger size, and as you're working on it, you can try it on before you finish your hat and see if you want to stop there. Because the cool thing about this hat is it is made vertically, so it's made, let me show you, this one is mostly done. It is made basically as a larger rectangle, and then you sew it into a tube, and then we finish up the very top of the hat here. So what that means is when you're working back and forth in these rows in this direction, you can stop at any point, or you can add more rows if you need to in order to alter the fit of your hat. So, which is great because as you're working on it, as long as it's long enough, then you can make it to fit as you're going. Okay, so that just makes it a little bit easier. It takes a little bit of the pressure off, especially if your gauge isn't dead on, then you don't need to be so worried about it. So I always err on the side of going to the larger size if you're in between sizes, because you can always fold this brim up just a little bit more, and then you can stop a little earlier if you want to, if you feel like, okay, that's the perfect size. But one thing is if you are altering how many rows you're doing back and forth, I just want to make sure that you're doing it in complete sets of 4. It has a 4-row repeat. So I'll explain a little bit more about that as we're working on our hat, but just a heads up there. You can't just stop on any row and sew it together and have the pattern match up. That's it's not going to happen. All right. So you will need anywhere from, let's see, about 214 to 357 yards of a DK weight, which is a number 3, which is a little bit thinner than like the most prevalent thickness of yarn that you find in the big box stores. So if you think of the large skeins of acrylic yarn that you use for Afghans and that sort of thing in the big box stores, here in the United States anyway, that is the most popular size, is a number 4 here. It is a little thinner than that, just to give you an idea. So it's called a DK weight, and it is a number 3. And then you will just need a couple of stitch markers and a crochet hook, and I am using an F, which is a 3.75 millimeter hook, but you will use whatever size you need to in order to get the correct gauge. Okay, so the gauge is listed in your pattern here. It's listed 23.5 stitches and 24 rows is 4 inches in the yarn over slip stitch back loop ribbing pattern, which if you're like, what is that? I don't know what that means. That's okay, because I'm going to be showing you all the stitches you need to know. But basically, you're going to be making a square that is made with this stitch pattern here, just a square worked back and forth in turned rows. So you can go ahead and chain maybe 26 stitches across and work back and forth in that yarn over slip stitch through the back loop only stitch pattern, which I'll be showing you. Until you get a little over 4 inches, and then just measure how many stitches are in 4 inches. Okay, so get out your little ruler and measure across 4 inches, count your stitches, measure up 4 inches, count your rows, and then compare it to what I have. If you are getting more stitches and rows in those 4 inches, then what that means is your tension is a little tighter. You need to go up a hook size. If you were getting fewer stitches, then you need to crochet a little bit tighter. So then you're going to go down a hook size or 2, So the hook size thing, it's just one of those things. As you get more comfortable with crochet and you start working on your gauge, you usually can look at someone's pattern and just, you can start out with what they have, or if you just know you're consistently having to go up hook sizes, maybe you just have to, maybe you start with something bigger than someone suggests and try it out. Okay, so that's just one of those things, getting gauge. All right, we've got some hellos. Sue McFicker is saying hello. Hi, Sue. Great looking set. Thank you for sharing. Yes, I am very excited about these hats too. Thank you very much. And Stacy is saying good morning from frozen North Iowa. Yeah, I'm in Minnesota and it is very cold here today. And Lee is saying good morning from East Texas. Good morning, Lee, and welcome. Okay, so we talked about our materials. You just need some yarn, a couple of stitch markers. So I'm going to be using these stitch markers. They have to be the kind that you can remove, take in and out. And then your crochet hook, and that's it. Alrighty, so I am going to begin by showing you the smallest size, so you don't have to see so much repetition, me making so many of the yarn over slip stitches in a row. But I will be explaining a little bit between the differences in making the different sizes, because one of the questions I get the most often when people are working from a pattern and they're maybe a little bit newer to reading patterns is they don't quite understand what all the parentheses are about in patterns. So I just want to show you that really quickly. When you take a look at a pattern, for example, here we have instructions. It says Beanie, chain 36, and then in parentheses it says 44, 52, 61, and 70. So this is giving you instructions for all the different sizes, and they are listed here in the size that they are, in the order that the sizes are listed here. So baby comes first, and then toddler is the next set of information right inside those parentheses, child, adult, adult, large. Okay, so those numbers correspond to the different sizes, and it'll be like that throughout the pattern. Okay, so anytime you see those parentheses with a bunch of numbers in it, look for the number that pertains to your size, and it will be listed in the same order that your sizes are listed in the front of the pattern. All right, so since we're making the smallest size, we are going to start with the beginning chain of 36 stitches. All right, so there's my slip knot on my hook.
and we're going to create 36 stitches, or 36 chains, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. Okay, so now to begin with row 1. Oh, I wanted to mention 2 things quick before I forget. This version of the download actually has 2 row 1s, which are exactly the same. You can see here, row 1, wrong side, row 1, wrong side. Just get rid of one of those. They're exactly the same. It doesn't matter. And I will get that fixed as soon as I can. I just didn't realize, for some reason I didn't realize that there were 2 row 1s until this morning. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that if you had downloaded this before today, if you had downloaded it, yesterday, or I'm not sure if it was up the day before, there were a couple of things that I had changed in the pattern. It already has been updated, so if you are downloading this, at the time of this, or at any point today, then your pattern is fine. It's the same version as mine. You just have to cross out row number 1. But if you downloaded it previously, I want to let you know that some of the numbers have changed. I kind of reconfigured how I did some things. Even if you followed it exactly as it is written, you will still get a hat that works out great and it'll look nice. But I did figure out one little trick that I could do in switching around some of the numbers so that all the sizes look the same as we're progressing through the hat. So it would be less confusing when you're watching this live if you're making any of the sizes. It should look very similar. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but basically what I want to tell you is if you've already started your hat, it's still going to work out. You can continue. You don't have to rip it out. But if you have not started your hat and you downloaded this pattern before today, then you should download a new copy because it's just going to make a little more sense with this tutorial here. Okay, so let's see. Oh, we got a lot more hellos. Debbie McClune, good morning from Pennsylvania. Hi, Debbie. And Christy C., good morning from Chile, Dallas, Texas. Looking forward to the new pattern. So fun. Thank you, Christy. And Darlene is saying hello from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And Neri is saying good evening from Italy. Wow. Well, welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you guys are here. All right, so we're going to start with row number 1. So we're beginning with the wrong side. And later on, when we get a little bit more fabric, you can go ahead and mark the right side if that helps. But you'll be able to tell the difference as you get further in the pattern. You should be able to tell the difference between the right side and the wrong side. They're pretty different looking. So let's see. So we're going to start with the second chain from the hook. We're going to work into the bottom of the chain and we're going to make a slip stitch into the next stitch. Okay, so here's the top of our chain, has all those little V's. We roll it over so the V's are touching the table, and then you can see all those little horizontal dashes. So that's where we're going to work our first row of stitches. We're skipping that first horizontal dash, which is right there. That's just going to be a turning chain. And we're going to place our hook underneath the second horizontal dash, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then pull through that loop on the hook to be our first slip stitch of the row. Now we're going to go ahead and mark that stitch, especially if you are a new crocheter or newer crocheter, or at least newer to the stitch pattern. Definitely mark the first and last stitches of the rows, and also there will be one other point that I will show you that I like to mark as well, just to help me keep track of numbers so I don't have to count stuff later. Okay, so we did the first slip stitch, and then we are going to half double crochet in each of the next 4 stitches, slip stitch into the next 4 stitches, and then we are going to repeat that section within the brackets either 2 or 3 or 4 times depending on what size you're working on. So we're just going to do that 2 times because we're working on the smallest size. So we're going to start with a half double crochet, so that's a yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up loop, yarn over, and pull through 3. Okay, we're going to do that 3 more times. Insert, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 3. That's the second half double crochet. Let's do 2 more. Third one, fourth one, and now we're going to switch to doing 4 slip stitches. So we're still continuing to work into that back of the chain where those horizontal dashes are, and we're doing 4 slip stitches. That's 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to switch back. We're going to repeat what's in the brackets. So we're going to do 4 half double crochets, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to switch back to those slip stitches, 4 of those. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so I have completed the amount of repeats. I'm only doing 2 repeats. You can see here's the taller stitches, those are the half double crochets, and here's the slip stitches. So there's 1 repeat and 2 repeats because I'm doing the smallest size, so you'll have more for larger sizes. And then I want to show you what happens next here. So after you repeat that, then it says half double crochet in each of the next 0, 4, 0, 4, 0 stitches. So a lot of times I get questions about this. People get very confused when you say to crochet into 0 stitches. They're like, what? Why are you telling me to crochet into 0 stitches? That doesn't make any sense. The only reason that it's written like that is because I am writing a pattern for all the sizes at once. So some of the sizes you're going to crochet, you're going to make half double crochets into the next 4 stitches. And some of the sizes, you're not going to do anything at that point. So if it says crochet into 0 stitches, you just skip over that little part of the information. You don't have to do anything. You're not crocheting anything because there's 0 stitches. Okay, so then after that, then you're going to yarn over slip stitch into each of the next. And then for me, I'm doing 18 stitches. For the other sizes, you might be doing up to 36 stitches. Okay, but basically you're doing a yarn over slip stitch all the way across the rest of your chain. Let me show you how to do that. So the yarn over slip stitch, you start with a yarn over, and then you insert your hook underneath your bottom bump there, back of the chain. Then you're going to yarn over, and you're going to pull up a loop. So this is just like a half double crochet so far. But this is the distinction. Instead of making another yarn over to draw through, that would be a regular half double crochet. Instead of doing that, you are just going to continue pulling that last loop you made through those 2 loops on your hook. Okay, so we're going to do that again. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through 2. Just keep pulling that loop through. Okay, so yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through 2. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull, no yarn over there. I was telling you a half double crochet. Let's do that again. Just erase that last thing I said from your memory. Okay, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through 2. So one thing that I think when people are working on this stitch pattern, when you're first learning how to do it, sometimes it ends up it feels awkward to go through that, this loop right here, and sometimes it can get a little bit tight because of that. So one thing that I like to do is I pinch here at the base of where my this loop is and where this loop I just made. I just kind of pinch there with my thumb and my finger, and that way I'm able to pull up with my hook and stretch out those loops a little more so that I can get my hook through a little bit easier. Let me show you that again. So we're going to grab that loop, and then I pinch here and then pull through those 2 stitches. Through those 2 loops. So my fingers are always kind of hopping back and forth. They grab on. I didn't even really realize that I was doing this until so I love this stitch pattern, and I've been using this stitch pattern quite a bit in the last couple of years. And I did not realize that my fingers would hop up and grab onto that until I started getting questions about, well, why I have such a hard time doing that stitch. I feel like it's so awkward. And I kept thinking, why is it so awkward? And so I was trying to do it, and I thought, okay, here I am hopping up and pinching that little area so that I could get my hook through, and I didn't even realize I was doing that. So that's one thing about, teaching other people how to crochet is you really have to slow down and look at what you're doing, because sometimes you do things without even realizing it. And it really helps to be able to tell other people all the little tricks and tips. Okay, looks like we've got some more hellos. To Neil saying hello from Clarksville, Tennessee, hello. Nancy is saying good morning from Vancouver, British Columbia. I love learning to crochet from you. This is a great project. Thank you, Nancy. And Marlena is saying good morning from Tennessee. And we have Tony saying good morning from Illinois. Hi, you guys. All right, so we made it to the end of our row. That's row 1. Okay, remember, cross out one of those row 1s. We only need one row 1 here. And then we're going to go to row 2. So we are going to start out our row by chaining 1, and then we're going to turn our work. So just like you're turning a very long, skinny page in a book. And then we're going to yarn over, slip stitch through the back loop into each of the next 18 stitches. Oh, you guys, I forgot to place my stitch marker. So I meant to tell you, we'll do it on this next row, but I meant to tell you the very first stitch that you make that's a yarn over slip stitch, place a stitch marker in the top of that stitch, because that will help you when you're coming back across to know when to switch back and forth, because you're basically switching between the ribbing stitch pattern and then the other stitch pattern that kind of has all those cool waves that sort of looks like cables, but it's secretly not cables. All right, so we already did our turning chain, and we're gonna turn our work, and then we're gonna do those yarn over slip stitches, but this time, instead of doing it underneath both loops how we would normally crochet. Normally we would put our hook right here, okay, so because we're skipping the turning chain, normally we would put our hook right here, but we are going to place our hook underneath that back loop, which is just right there. Okay, so we're going to yarn over, insert through the back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through 2. So that's the very first stitch of row number 2, and then we're going to continue that. So yarn over, insert through the back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, pinch and pull through 2. I always think about it that way now that I've realized I'm pinching. Pinch and pull through 2. And it helps me when I say that so that I don't accidentally yarn over there, because my body wants to make a half double crochet sometimes. But we don't want to do that. All right, so we're just going to continue working these yarn over slip stitches through that back loop all the way across until we've worked 18 of those for this size. And I'm going to count them up in just a minute here. But basically the point where you switch to the other stitch pattern is right around the halfway point along here. And it'll get a lot more obvious. I mean, it'll get super more obvious when we put our stitch marker in there, but also it'll be a lot more clear as you get a couple of rows worked. You'll just be ready for that change, for that stitch pattern change. Okay, let's see here. And it'll get a lot less awkward. It's always so hard for the first couple of rows to hang on to things. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, one more, and 18. Okay, so I'm placing that stitch marker here in the last yarn over slip stitch that I had done in row 2. Okay, and now I'm going to switch back to the other stitch pattern. So here we are. We've already worked our yarn over slip stitches. Then we're going to slip stitch back loop into each of the next 4 stitches, 0 stitches, 4 stitches, 0 stitches, 4 stitches. Okay, so my instructions are right in front of the parentheses, so I'm going to slip stitch through the back loop under the next 4 stitches. So don't do the yarn over. That's tempting also. So just do a slip stitch through that back loop. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And, you know, like I mentioned before, for some of the sizes, you're going to be working 0 stitches there, meaning you just skip over that little part of the information. You don't need to do anything there. Then we're going to do a half double crochet through the back loop into the next 4 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to slip stitch into the next 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, and then we're going to half double crochet. Oh, okay, so then at this point you would do a repeat of these 8 stitches, okay? So you would half double crochet in the next 4, slip stitch into the next 4. You would repeat that for however many more times you need to. We are only doing that once, so we're done for this size. And then we are going to make 4 half double crochets into the next 4 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and we are still only working those into that back loop, okay? So actually everything from row number 2 on, no matter what side you're working on, doesn't matter, you are always going to be working into that back loop. We're just ignoring that front loop now. Okay, so then we're going to end with a slip stitch in the back loop into that very last stitch. Okay, so we're always ending with a slip stitch here, and we're always starting with a slip stitch, and the slip stitches are always in that back loop only. Okay, so we're going to chain 1, turn our work, and remember what I just said, we always start with a slip stitch through the back loop, so we're going to do a slip stitch right there. This is the beginning of row 3. All right, so we did our slip stitch, then we're going to slip stitch into the next 4 stitches, and then half double crochet into the next 4 stitches, all worked into that back loop, okay? So, and this is gonna get easier. I'm gonna show you as we get a couple more rows in, I'm gonna show you a way that you know what to do next, so you don't have to keep looking at your instructions. It'll make a little bit more sense as we get a little bit further here. So we're gonna do 4 slip stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4 slip stitches, and then we're going to do 4 half double crochets. Now you can see how it's wider, narrower. So every other row, so let me say, on all of the even numbered rows, so rows number 2, number 4, everything after that that's an even row. If you come up to a half double crochet stitch, you're going to place a half double crochet stitch into it. If you come up to a slip stitch, you're going to place a slip stitch into it. But on all the odd rows, you are doing the opposite of that. So except for this very first stitch, the first and last stitch, it's always a slip stitch in the back loop. So just know that. Then when you move on to doing your repeats, because we had 4 half double crochets here, we made 4 slip stitches here because we're doing the opposite of what we had. And now we're going to do 4 half double crochets, and it's going to kind of fill in that little dip that you can see there. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're still just working in that back loop. And now we're going to switch back to the slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're going to switch to the half double crochets here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're at our marker, so we're going to switch to the other stitch pattern. So we're going to be doing yarn over slip stitches through that back loop only. All right, so yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, place your stitch marker back in there. Oh, Sue McVicker is saying, I have to admit, I love the stitch pattern, and in haste this morning, I thought the photo was showing a knit hat. I love how the crochet has branched out over the years. Yes, this actually, even the ribbing here, this looks so much like knitting. So much like a rib stitch in knitting, like a 1x1 if it's stretched out a little bit. But it feels a little bit more springy than that. It has a little bit more elasticity, like it wants to bounce back a little bit more than if I had knit this in a 1x1 rib here. And then this part, with all these little V's that you see connected, I mean, it really does look like, it looks a lot like knitting, you're right. Jody is saying good morning from the Aloha State, Hawaii. Aw, I agree with Sue, looks like a knit. Yep, it does. Okay, so we're continuing along with our yarn over slip stitches. And these are not super tall stitches. They are a little taller than, I think they're about the same height actually as a single crochet. And with this number 3 yarn, it is going to take a little bit longer, than with a thicker yarn. But I have to say, and it's just so comfortable and squishy, and I really just wanted to change things up a little bit. I oftentimes stick to those number 4 yarns because I know a lot of people like to have kind of quick projects. We're all busy with our lives, and but every once in a while I like to throw a thinner yarn weight in there because, well, I love them. And it's just really comfortable, and it's not, it's just a nice stretchy hat. And it's plenty warm, even though it's a little bit thinner than those worsted weight. It's plenty warm, especially with that folded up brim. And this is a pretty dense ribbing stitch pattern here that we're working up. It doesn't let a lot of the cold wind through. All right, so there is our last yarn over slip stitch. I'm going to chain 1, turn my work, and I'm going to start working that same yarn over slip stitch all the way up to my marker. So you just know every time you get to this bottom half of your hat where the ribbing is, you're just always going to be working those yarn over slip stitches through the back loop. That's all you're doing, and then you're chaining 1 at the end and turning your work. And because you're not going to be working into those row ends, it's extra important that your row ends are that you're really consistent when you turn your project. And what I mean by that is, like, when you get to the end, do exactly the same motions every time, whether you are turning it first and then making your chain 1, because I know some people like to turn it first and then make a turning chain. Or if you do it the other way, you can chain 1 first and then turn your work, but always turn your work in the same direction, and always do it consistently, regardless of which method you pick, because if you do that and you make your last stitch, make sure that it's not getting kind of long or loopy or stretched out, then you're going to have a super neat and tidy edge there. Even though that it's the edge of your turned rows, it still looks really good. That's kind of the secret to that, is if just consistency. All right, we've made it to our marked stitch. That is marking the last of the yarn over slip stitch pattern. And now we are working on, let's see, row 3. So we have 1, 2, and this is the 3rd row. Oh wait, no, this must be row 4. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, yep, row 4, sorry about that. All the even numbered rows are on the wrong side of your work. And so if you're working a wrong side, if you start with that slip stitch, yarn over slip stitch ribbing first, you're working a wrong side row. Plus, after I get a little bit further, I'll show you the difference between the right side and the wrong side of the stitch pattern, and you'll just be able to recognize it too. All right, so row number 4. We've already worked our yarn over slip stitch section. Then we are going to make a half double crochet through the back loop in each of the next 4 stitches for my size. But for some of the sizes, you're not making any half double crochets at that point, and you're going to jump right into this next instruction. Okay, so if you have a 0 there, you just skip over this, and then you start working from this. But I have to work 4 half double crochets here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we are going to switch to our slip stitches. So we're going to do 4 of those. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And switch back to those half double crochets. So basically the gist of it, this section here, is you are working 4 stitches in a row. So you're either doing 4 half double crochets or you're doing 4 slip stitches. And to know which is which, see, did I get a little bit off here? Let me just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh, I'm missing a stitch somewhere. Hang on. Let me just count this up real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I must have skipped a stitch somewhere. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. I think I must have skipped a stitch somewhere down here. So I'm going to add an extra one in. Let me just double check. It feels like that's off by just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to back that up a little bit. There it is. I missed it. Oh, maybe not. Okay, I'm not exactly sure where I missed my stitch, but I could tell I was off because I was supposed to have 5 slip stitches in a row at the very end of this. Because I don't want to rip this whole thing out, I probably would if I was making this at home and to rip out a row and then look at it, but I'm just going to add an extra stitch in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm putting those half double crochets back in here. 1, 2, that's where I skipped it. I see it. It's right there. I skipped it in a row below. Okay. I'm going to add an extra half double crochet in here. So I already have 2 half double crochets. So here's my little trick. So I'm going to combine this stitch with the next stitch by doing this, going through those back loops. Here, I'm teaching you how to cheat right here, you guys. Pay attention. Okay, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all 3. So I just did a half double crochet in both of those stitches linked together, but now that loop is a little smaller, so now I can make a half double crochet right here. So I just basically added a stitch back in. And now I'm going to do my 4 slip stitches. And here we go. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to end with 1 more slip stitch. So that means 5. 5 slip stitches at the end of row 4. Okay? All right, so now you can see this is where the half double crochets are, slip stitches are there, half double crochets here, slip stitches are there. So then we just chain 1 and turn. And the next row is really a repeat of row number 1, except that we are working it through the back loop only. That's the only difference between row number 5 and row number 1. So we're going to start out with that slip stitch that we always do into the very first stitch. So there's our slip stitch through the back loop only. And then we're going to place, because this is a right side row, you can start to see these little wiggly lines here. This is a right side row, so we're going to be doing the opposite. So these are slip stitches, they're really short. It's kind of a little dip there, so we're going to put half double crochets here, slip stitches here, half double here, slip stitches here. So we're doing the opposite of what we had. I made that stitch a little tight there. 1, 2, 3, and 4 half double crochets. And now we're going to do 4 slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're going to do 4 half double crochets. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we're going to do 4 slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, whoops, and 4. Okay, so now we have worked all the way up through row 5, and we would just continue working those yarn over slip stitches all the way across. After row 5, you've already learned pretty much all you need to know in order to make that big rectangle I showed you earlier. So after row 5, you're going to repeat rows 2, 3, and 4. Let's see, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Another 16 times for this size. So after you've done this far, after you've worked this far up through row number 5, you repeat rows 2 through 5 another 16 times for my size, or it could be all the way up to 28 times depending on what size you're making. And then there's a little note in here about altering the circumference of your hat. So it's telling you to repeat the rows number 2 through 5, repeat that section more or fewer times. So this is what I was talking about earlier, how you can very easily alter the circumference of your hat, no problem, but you have to go all the way through the cycle, okay? So you're going to go through 2 through 5, and then you're going to finish up by repeating rows 2 through 4 once again. So you're going to end this big long rectangle with a repeat of row 4. So, and just so you know, that would mean ending with that slip stitch through the back loop in each of the next 5 stitches. That's the only place where I write it 5 stitches in a row like that. So that's kind of like, that should turn on a little light in your brain. Oh, this is could be a place to end. I could end here if I wanted to. All right, so let me show you what it looks like after you keep repeating and keep repeating. Here's my hat. And now this, okay, so this might look a lot bigger because it is. This is a larger size. This is the adult size here. So I have finished up right here. This was my very last row, was working a repeat of row 4, ending with those 5 slip stitches. Let me just replace my hook here. And all right, we got some more hellos. Hello, Carrie from Spicewood, Texas. She's glad she found us. Awesome. I'm glad you're here. And Travis is saying, love it. Good morning from Central Kentucky. Awesome. Hello. And Debbie McClune is saying, why did you add the half double crochet using 2 loops instead of just adding an extra one in the same stitch? Okay. Okay, so the reason I did that when I made that, so that's not part of this pattern. I just want to clarify for anybody else. What I was trying to do was sneak an extra half double crochet in there. And instead of putting 2 half double crochets into that same loop, what I did was I put a half double crochet into that back loop. Then I used my hook and I kind of combined the stitch I just made with the following stitch that hadn't been worked yet, worked a half double crochet into both those loops held together. Then I worked a half double crochet into the second loop that I just combined. And the reason I was doing that is because we're working through only the back loop as we're working our way across, and that back loop gets really stretched out. So this is my sneaky little way of adding extra stitches in there without stretching out that loop too much, because then you get like a little window and then you can see it. So it was really just a cosmetic thing. You could have put 2 stitches into that same back loop, but I feel like it just looks a little better. It makes your loops a little tighter when you combine those 2 stitches together, and then you work again into that next stitch that you, I don't know if this is making any sense, but it was mostly just a cosmetic thing. Okay, and Tennille is saying, could we use number 4 yarn? So this was written for a number 3 yarn, but you could use a number 4 yarn and maybe just, if you're okay with your hat being a little taller, you could use the same size that you were planning on, or go down 1 size and see how that goes. As you're crocheting this, you'll get a little chunk done, okay? So you're gonna start here, and then you can see about how tall your hat's gonna be. So you can fold this up, place it on your head, and know that there's gonna be a little circle at the top of your hat, right here. This is what we add to the very top of the hat. So just know that, you can kind of imagine that to be the right, in the right placement on your head and say, oh, is that the right height? As long as you have the height of the hat correct, then you can just work as many rows, as many repeats of that rows 2 to 5 as you want to get the circumference you want. So in that way, it's very, very easy to customize and kind of mess around with the thickness of your yarn, because your row gauge is probably not going to match if you use a thicker yarn. But it doesn't matter, because you can just work fewer rows and sew it together, and that'll work great. All right, so here we are at the end, and then we would just fasten off. So we're just gonna cut ourselves enough yarn so that we can do a whip stitch here. And I'm going to pull that through. Okay, and I'm gonna remove this marker. And then I like to stitch this together with the right sides facing so I can see everything. Oh, and here's another little tip. When you finish working that row, a repeat of row 4, that's when you end your hat as a repeat of row 4, your pieces will fit together. They will nest. See how those little lines fit together? This sticks up, this swoops up here, and that fits right into it. Okay, so that's how you know you've ended at the right place. All right, so we are just going to be working through, the 2 top loops of each edge, and we're just doing a whip stitch, just like this, to sew it together. You can also, I know oftentimes I will do a slip stitch to join these pieces together. That's how I usually like to, when I make something sideways like this, I usually like to do that with a slip stitch. But the reason that I'm doing it this way is because I feel like it blends in much better. And I know that seems weird because we are actually sewing something. And that seems weird. Like, why wouldn't it blend in better if you were crocheting it? But it really does blend in really well. And you can almost not even see this seam after you sew it up. All right, so I'm just matching up. You could pin this all together, but if you are good at recognizing your stitches and you're able to put your needle through the next stitch in each row each time, not accidentally put your needle into a place you've already worked or skip a stitch or whatever. If you're pretty good at recognizing that, then you don't need to pin it, because pinning it is just it's just a 1-to-1 ratio here of stitches. So you really don't need to worry about that. So I skip it because I would probably stab myself running my hand along where those pins are. Okay, and Debbie is saying, yes, it makes perfect sense. Oh, good, okay. So I'm a very visual person, and so it really helps me to teach with like pictures and showing people things. And when I'm just trying to explain something, I know I find myself waving my hands around, but that doesn't actually really help anything. So I'm glad that made sense to you. And Jennifer's saying, Alabama says hi, and thanks a bunch. Can't wait to start. Awesome. Hi, Alabama. All right. So I will get a little further on in. I don't know if I'll finish this whole seam. Just trying to keep my eye on the time and make sure we have time to finish the top. But there is our seam, and you can just barely see it. Okay, it's kind of blending in, and with a little bit of blocking, you should be able to make that kind of wobbliness go away. Okay, so you would just continue sewing these together. Actually, I'll get just a little bit into that ribbed stitch and make sure you guys know what loops you're supposed to go through. Sometimes it can be a little confusing to know which 2 loops are the loops you're supposed to stitch through, especially when you're using stitches like a half double crochet, because it makes that 3rd loop on the back of your work. So you just have to take a look at it. So right now, here's a V here and here's a V here. Okay, so we're going through this V that's on the top. It's almost rolling to the inside. We're not going through this V that's sitting on this top surface. All right, and here, this one's a little bit less confusing because it doesn't really look very much like a V here. That's from our foundation row there. Okay, so again, we're not going underneath here, but we're going underneath that loop and that loop if I kind of pull it towards the top there. Okay, so just making that whip stitch, and it actually blends in pretty well. And you can just go all the way down to here and then weave in your ends. So after you do that, then you're going to join the yarn to the top of your hat. Let's see here. Just gonna cut this. All right, so in order to work the top little circle, I'm gonna show you how to pick up your stitches. Let's see, okay, so here we are, closing the top of the hat. We're gonna pull up a loop at the top opening at the seam. So here is our seam right here. Right there. We pulled up a loop, so we just inserted yarn over and pulled up a loop. Then we're gonna single crochet into each ridge around. And then we're not gonna join, we're gonna work in spiral rounds. So what in the world is a ridge? What are you talking about, Brenda, right? So the ridges are formed here. They're the little V's. There's one here, and then there's one neighboring it right there. So there's 2 ridges between my thumbs right there. This is not a ridge. That's kind of like a little valley between. And here's 2 ridges right here. Okay, so we have 2 ridges here, 2 ridges here. We're going to be working single crochets into the top of each of the ridges. So we'll just insert our hook here, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. I'm going to pull on this yarn tail just a little to make it a little smaller. That was our first stitch of the round. I'm going to mark that because that might be a little hard to see later. And then here's the next ridge right next to it. So we're going to make a single crochet there. We're skipping over that little valley. And when you do that, here's the next ridge. When you skip over these valleys, you want to make sure you're not like extending your loop over here because you don't want any holes. What you're doing is you're bringing that next stitch right next to it. You're keeping this nice and tight. I'm putting a little tension here. So you can make that stitch pretty tight so it's kind of gathering in the top of your hat. And it just gives you a nice place to put those stitches, and that way you don't have to really count it. You just single crochet around, putting one single crochet into the top of each of those ridges as you work your way around. There we go. So another thing, this is just a little bit of troubleshooting while I'm working my way around there. I want to tell you, if for some reason you feel like your hat turned out too long, like let's say you substituted with the number 4 yarn and you're like, ugh, it's too long. You could do just one round of this single crochet, what I'm doing right here. You could work this round, and then you could just run your needle through and cinch it in as best as you can and do some stitches to kind of gather in the top of your hat. It won't look quite as smooth as this, but that's okay. Like the top of a hat looks, that's just a different style. If you don't mind that style of having it be a little bit more gathered in, that will allow your hat to be just a little bit shorter. So that's another route you can take there too. Or if you just plain don't really like how that circle looks on the top of the hat, that's another route for you as well. This hat really is tall enough that even if as you were making it, if you made the correct size and it was all turning out the right length and everything, you could skip that little section of single crochet after this round and just kind of weave your needle through all those stitches and pull it tight if you wanted to, if you like that look to the top of your hat. Because you know what? You're making it, so you can do it your own way. All right, looks like we're coming around here. I'm just going to check and see if anyone has added anything. Nope, looks like we're all caught up. Good, okay. All right, a few more stitches here. And then we will move on. There's just a few rounds. And I know it seems like it's going to take forever because this is pretty big here, but it gets decreased pretty quickly. So we're nearing the end of our hat here pretty soon. All right. So let's see. Yeah, and speaking of that, if you guys are hanging on to any questions that you wanted to ask, if you're curious about anything, or another thing I like is when people make suggestions on projects that they would like to work on in the future. That's a great thing to put in the chat too. All right, so we've made it all the way around, placing our last 2 single crochets into these 2 ridges. This ridge is a little bit sloppier looking because that's where our whip stitch is, but we still worked into it. And there's our very first stitch that kind of got a little stretched out, so I'm going to pull on that. And now we are going to start working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. So just place 1 single crochet into each of these stitches for the next round. So this would be round number 2. Yep, so we're just working even. One thing that I wanted to mention while I am working my way around here is that at 11:30 today, I'm going to be doing another live. Instead of doing a demonstration though, we're going to be talking about New Year's resolutions. So if anybody is interested in joining that, I welcome you to come at 11:30. I'm going to be talking a little bit about, I'm doing a big reality check with my projects because I have a tendency to, when things aren't working out and I need to do, I switch to a new thing, and then sometimes those old projects just sit. So this is going to be my year of the purge. I'm trying to get everything organized and get rid of all the half-made projects that have just been sitting there neglected, some of them for years. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that and how I'm deciding what to do with everything. And then we're going to talk about goal setting and that type of thing too. So if anybody's interested in that, please join us at 11:30. We'll be talking about that. All right. I think I will just show you, let's see. Yep. Okay, so you guys don't have to watch me continue making single crochets all the way around this hat. I'm gonna stop here at this halfway point, but just imagine I went all the way around to this point. After that, round number 3, you're gonna be doing an invisible single crochet around, okay? So, and what that means, invisible, oh, that should be an invisible decrease. Oh, I just caught another mistake. Invisible single crochet decrease. Okay, so rounds number 3 and round number 5, you guys. This is a mistake right here in the pattern. So an invisible single crochet decrease. That should be INV single crochet, and then decrease is DEC. Okay, so that's what this should be, and also as well on number 5. That should be the same thing, invisible single crochet decrease. And I will get that corrected after this live, so that if you guys haven't downloaded it already, you will be able to get the fixed up copy. But if you did already download it, I'm telling you right now, you just need to go ahead and change this to, instead of invisible single crochet, it has to be an invisible single crochet decrease. All right, so we're going to be decreasing. Just imagine our hook was over here at the very beginning. So to do an invisible decrease, you're just going to, I do this a little bit differently than some other people, but you can do it the way that you like to do it. I'm just going to show you my version. So what I do is I insert my hook underneath just the front loop of the next stitch, and then I insert my hook under both loops of the following stitch. Then I yarn over and I pull through both of those stitches. Now I have 2 loops on my hook, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through 2. Let me do that maybe over the white so you can see a little better. Let's do it again. So I insert my hook underneath just the front loop, and then the next stitch I go under both loops. Now this is where my invisible decreases are a little different. Usually people just go underneath the front loops of the next 2 stitches, which is totally fine. You can absolutely do it that way. I like going under the 2 loops of the second stitch because I feel like it has less of a tendency to stretch those loops out. It feels a little bit more anchored, and it pulls the increase together a little more. So I especially like to do this method of the invisible decrease when I'm working on something where I'm trying to bring the fabric in and I don't want to see big gaps there. It just seems to help a little bit, but it's a very minute difference really, you guys. Okay, so we're going to be doing these decreases all the way around the hat. So you're going to be ending up with half as many stitches at the end of your round as in the last stitch. Okay, so underneath that first loop, underneath the second loop, and then yarn over, pull through. First loop, 2 loops, yarn over and pull through. Okay. All right, so maybe we're running short on time, so I think I might just do a few more, and then I will show you how to close the top of this hat. And you'll just have to use your imaginations just a little bit, because we didn't do our full, we didn't make it all the way around to this stitch marker. So I'm going to be going around to here to do my decreases a little bit here. So that way, at least I'll end up with the right amount of stitches, even though I'll have 1 fewer round and half of the top of my hat. I don't know if that makes sense, but because I shortened that 1 row, I just kind of stopped before I was at the end. I'll have 1 less row on 1/2 of the crown of my hat, but that's not even going to be noticeable, I don't think. Okay, insert through the front, under both. There we go. All right, so normally when we get to our stitch marker, we would be done with that round. But I'm going to continue working around because otherwise I'm not going to be able to show you how to close the top of the hat. There we go. And if you are used to doing just a regular single crochet 2 together and you prefer that method, you can absolutely do that too. It doesn't have to be the invisible decrease. I just feel like the invisible decrease pulls it together just a little tighter, and it's a little bit less bumpy, I guess, than the standard single crochet 2 together. So we don't need to be that picky though. You can do whatever method you want to decrease your stitches so that you end up with half of the stitches that you had from the previous round. All right, I'm probably getting pretty close. Probably getting pretty close to where I started decreasing. And then, so after you've done your 1 round of decreases in round 3, the next round you would just work 1 single crochet into each stitch around. Okay, so I'm going to do that right now. And I'm not absolutely sure that I have the right amount of stitches. I just kind of eyeballed that. And the reason is because I didn't really mark where I started doing my decreases. But if you were following the actual directions and you started decreasing at the beginning of round 3 after you actually completed round 2, then you would be fine. So don't look too closely at the number of stitches that I have here. All right, I'm about halfway there. Oops. And one thing I do want to mention too is at the end of completing the top of this hat, it does look a little kind of wavy and wrinkly where the circle that I'm making right here meets up with that textured stitch pattern. And all you need to do is block it when you're done. And so if you've never heard of blocking or you've never blocked anything before, all blocking means is you're just sort of treating your project with either steam, especially if it's an acrylic fiber, I would recommend steam, or you're going to make your hat or whatever you're making wet, squeeze out as much water as possible, kind of roll it up in a towel, but you don't want to wring it or twist it or stretch it out of shape or anything like that. And then you just let it dry. And so that way you can kind of shape your stitches until everything looks nice and even. All right, so here I am. I'm going to be doing my very last round of decreases. So this should say invisible single crochet decrease around until, and there may be 1 stitch left over, then you just do a single crochet into that last stitch. Don't worry about it. Okay, so we're still doing those same decreases that we did before. So I'm doing inserting my hook under the front loop and then under both loops. That's how I'm doing mine, but you can do yours however you like. But back to the blocking thing, it really does make a difference, especially if you find your stitches to be uneven or, you know, the top of this hat. This is one of those hats that I would definitely recommend blocking because it looks kind of, well, you'll see. When I finish it up, you'll see the little bumps that it has, and I'll show you the blocked version compared to this version, and then you'll see what a difference it makes. But another reason to block your hat, even if you know the stitches weren't uneven or anything like that, another reason to block your hat is to give it just a little bit more softness or drape. This is especially noticeable when you have an acrylic project, and then you use steam on it. It makes your fibers just relax. And it just makes such a big difference. Makes a difference with wool too. And wool, when you get wool, I prefer to block wool with water by soaking it because some wools kind of bloom a little and kind of fill in those spaces and yeah. Okay, so I think I've worked around about the proper amount of stitches are left. But you know, if you're following this and you're just decreasing all the way around, you'll have the right amount of stitches left. And even if you were off by a stitch or 2, it really wouldn't matter. That would not be a big deal. Okay, so we just cut our yarn and then we're going to thread this onto our yarn needle. And if you're using a yarn that's pretty breakable, you could double up on your yarn strands, or you could even close this in with embroidery floss or some other kind of sturdier yarn if you want. This yarn is just fine. You can break it with your hands, but it's not super breakable. So I'm going to be placing my needle into that front loop only to pull this tight. But if you prefer, you can go underneath both loops of that last, you know, the top of that last row of stitches, or round of stitches, sorry. I just find it's a little easier to pull it into a circle that closes the center hole completely if you are only grabbing just that top loop or the front loop of each stitch. And as I do this, I put my finger in the middle because that helps me have something to press against and not accidentally put my needle through to the other side and snag something over there, because then if you try to gather in the top of the hat, it's going to get kind of messed up. So I always put my finger in the middle of the hole right there at the top of the hat, so that way you're going to keep yourself from accidentally doing that. All right, so we made it all the way around. Just have one more little stitch here. And then we just can go ahead and pull on that and close the top of our hat, just like that. And then we are going to weave in our ends. So with this pulled nice and tight, I go around one more time, sliding my needle through all of those loops. They should be easier to see now if you just kind of place your needle right there through those loops. Let's see, Jennifer is saying, I started a crochet project years ago. It's dust. Should I toss it and start over or wash it? Oh, it must be dusty. Or wash it when I'm done. I think that depends. If it's dusty, I guess it depends on how much. Well, I guess I would wash it first, because you don't want to keep handling a dusty thing, because you might be kind of rubbing the dust into the yarn and making it much harder to clean. So I would clean it first. Maybe place stitch markers on it, or find some way to finish off the piece that you have. I don't know if it's in pieces or what you have there, but I would wash it now, and then you can wash the whole thing when it's done. That's what I would do. Oh, Tammy says, your woodland mitts were my first crochet project. I made 12 pairs and gave as gifts at Thanksgiving. Everybody loved them. I'm so happy to get the hat pattern. Thank you. Oh my goodness, that's a lot of, that's amazing. And that was your first crochet project? That's pretty cool. Wow, I am honored that you chose my project to be your first crochet project, and that you made so many of them. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. That just made my day. All right, so I'm just weaving in my ends here. You know, you want to go in a couple of different directions so that your ends don't pop out, and that's it. So now you can see the top of the hat. And maybe this doesn't bother you, but I didn't like how deep these were curling under. So all you need to do is block it, and then it'll look like this one. So you can see the difference here between the top of this hat, which has kind of like a little gentle ruffliness there, and this one that's very shadowy, and you can see the difference. And maybe you like this better, and that's fine. I'm not going to come to your house and check if you blocked it, so you don't have to tell anyone. But I didn't like how that was looking, so I blocked it, and then it was a little bit softer, and it just seemed to get rid of those sort of deeper grooves in it there. So, and then, you know, this of course would have been seamed already. You would just turn that up. And if you were blocking it, you could also kind of steam this a little bit just to kind of set that little fold in it if you wanted to, but you don't have to. All right, I think unless we have any more, okay, it looks like we're all caught up. Okay, thank you guys so much for joining me. I really enjoyed working on this project and kind of coming back around to those woodland mitts that I love so much. And I'm glad that so many of you seem to be really liking the stitch pattern. It's deceptively easy. It's much easier than doing cables, and it's nice and warm. You don't get those holes, those telltale holes that sometimes happen between your cables. So this is just a great route to take for this really awesome texture.